Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye in Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, one of Kenya's top judges spends a dramatic day on the wrong side of court. Philomena Mwilu is the Deputy Chief Justice accused of corruption, but she says the government's trying to wage a politically motivated war on the Supreme Court. Also, Berlin hands back some of the bones of victims of a genocide in Namibia more than 100 years ago. It's estimated that up to 100,000 Namibians were murdered or put into concentration camps after an exterminating order issued in 1904. And in Lagos, more and more shoppers are turning to apps. Behind the screens, young entrepreneurs have seen their businesses flourish thanks to the rise in social media-driven shopping. We take a closer look. But first, lawyers for Kenya's Deputy Chief Justice say that corruption charges brought against her are part of an intensifying war on the Supreme Court. It was a day of legal drama for Philomena Mwilu, as her case was ping-ponged between various courts on Wednesday. She's trying to get the prosecution stopped and says that she's being politically targeted. She had been arrested a day earlier following accusations of abuse of office. Mwilu, the country's second highest judge, helped annul President Uhuru Kenyatta's initial election win last August. The government says that she's just been caught up in its crackdown on graft. Julia Steers joins us now with more. Julia, why would these charges against Mwilu personally be seen as an attack on the wider Kenyan judiciary?
Well, there certainly is a tremendous amount of speculation here that that could be the case. As you mentioned, just 1 year ago, this same Supreme Court made a really historic decision this month to overturn the presidential election of last summer, which, of course, President Kenyatta had won, and he won in a revote. But that prompted a revote, and it prompted several weeks of very public veiled threats by President Kenyatta against the Supreme Court. At one point, he vowed to, quote, fix the judiciary. So many people are concerned that this is, in fact, just him making good on those threats 1 year later. Of course, two of Mwilu's lawyers are also high-ranking, very visible officials from the opposition party who took part in that campaign last year. So that, of course, also fuels that speculation. But on the other side, as you mentioned, President Kenyatta has, from the very beginning of his first term, vowed to crack down on graft and corruption. And many people are saying that now that he's won a second term, it's his final term in office, that his administration is now finally making good on this promise to go after officials in politics and in business and perhaps even in the judiciary who are committing corrupt acts. And so there are certainly two sides of it on the speculative front here. And, you know, we'll see in the days to come how it plays out.
So how is it likely to play out? From the Supreme Court to the High Court, the Anti-Corruption Court, the Constitutional Court. We've seen this case moving through all of them very quickly. Why is that? And where does the case stand at the moment?
Well, of course, it all began with a very public speech by the public prosecutor who brought these charges yesterday. And there are very sophisticated legal minds on both sides of it. So it's moving quite quickly. She was arrested on these charges of corruption and failure to pay taxes and illegal dealings with a local bank yesterday. She made bond, and then today she appeared in the High Court to file an appeal to stop the proceedings in the lower court, stop the criminal proceedings specifically. She says that her dealings with this local bank were commercial transactions and should not be treated as a criminal offense. So the judge at the High Court today accepted that application and has delayed the proceedings until Friday. So on Friday, we should have a bit more clarity as to whether or not these criminal charges will be pursued against her.
Thanks very much. Julia Steers there for us in Nairobi. Well, on Wednesday, during the first visit to the continent in 5 years from a British Prime Minister, Nigeria and Britain signed a security and defence deal. The UK has pledged to help Nigeria with training, policing and human rights. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari met with UK leader Theresa May in Abuja on the second day of her whistle-stop tour of Africa. She'd been in South Africa a day earlier and has Kenya as her next stop. May's headed out with a business delegation in the hope of boosting Britain's economic ties ahead of its exit from the European Union next March. And Theresa May isn't the only European leader with their eyes on Africa this week. German Chancellor Angela Merkel is also on the continent on a 3-stop tour. Angela Merkel arrived in Senegal on Wednesday and met with President Macky Sall in Dakar. She'll also be heading out to Nigeria and Ghana. Economy, trade and migration are on the top of her agenda for talks with African leaders. Well, Berlin's handed back some of the bones of victims of a genocide in Namibia more than 100 years ago. The remains had been sent to Germany for study by dodgy anthropologists attempting to justify a theory about the racial superiority of Europeans. It's estimated that up to 100,000 Namibians were murdered or put into concentration camps after an exterminating order issued in 1904.
A church ceremony to hand over the remains of 27 Namibian men and women to a diplomatic delegation. This is the third service of its kind. These bones were taken by German colonial forces more than a century ago in the name of science and in a bid to prove the, quote, racial superiority of white Europeans over black Africans. This Wednesday, German officials said their return sends an important message.
We cannot undo the crimes of the colonial troops in the former German Southwest Africa in the years between 1904 and 1908. Together, we have to find ways to remember them.
In what historians call the first genocide of the 20th century, German soldiers slaughtered some 65,000 Herero and 10,000 Nama tribespeople. Today, descendants of the victims continue to be angry, calling for a formal apology and compensation, something that the two countries are said to be discussing.
Our ancestors who are here in front of us today have been here for too long, as the Bishop said, and for no good reason at all. And as such, it is only proper that at last, after 114 years, we are here to take them back home.
The remains will now be taken to Namibia, where they will be placed in the National Museum until it is decided where they will be buried.
Well, in Lagos, more and more shoppers are turning to apps like Instagram and WhatsApp, in part because those hitting the high street run the risk of getting caught up in notoriously dense traffic jams. Behind the screens, young entrepreneurs have seen their businesses flourish thanks to the rise in social media-driven shopping. Our correspondents report.
Tanya Omotayo has turned high street shopping on its head in Lagos. The designer sells high-end fashion brands at bargain prices. She models the clothes herself on her social media accounts, where she has more than 20,000 followers. The huge number of orders she gets has completely overwhelmed her fabric suppliers. Tanya wants to expand her business and open her own production factory.
When I first started, I did not have a store for the first 6 months. Now, I only sold on Instagram. I didn't have a website, I didn't have a location, I didn't have anything but my Instagram page, and maybe 2% of the people would email the email address in the bio.
Evelyn Aligba is another young entrepreneur who started House of GDI last year on Instagram. The young woman does all her advertising through WhatsApp. In fact, she runs her entire business from her phone, an essential business tool in a mega city like Lagos that allows her to reach out to more customers.
You have transportation issues, you have regulation issues sometimes, but at the end of the day, it pays off. It pays off. When you see those opportunities turning into clients, those opportunities turning into business, then it pays off. And then at the end of the day, you don't mind the stress.
Laura Ikeji is a self-made woman thanks to Instagram. She's an influencer and gets paid tens of thousands of euros by big brands to promote their products to her 1 million followers. She wears their clothes, shoes and accessories and posts photos online. She explains her rise to success in this book.
So it's joy for me to be able to teach young people and teach them that, they can actually do this via this platform without all the hustle and bustle, or leaving your house by 5 a.m. and coming back by 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. You can actually do it in the comfort of your home.
The new generation of entrepreneurs have thrown the rulebook out when it comes to making money and a name for themselves, and their playground, Lagos, is becoming the thriving creative hive for internet companies.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.
Join us on Down to Earth as we plunge into the world of cargo shipping. Now, it drives global trade, but at an environmental cost. That's because much of the world's ships run on cheap, dirty fuel. But new regulations aim to clean up maritime pollution. Gas, filters, renewable energy. Join us as we look at how the industry is setting sail for a cleaner future.
Down to Earth, presented by Molly Hall on France 24 and France24.com.